tardes. Muchísimas gracias a la organización del Coloquio IDEA por permitirnos contar, en el caso personal, moderar esta entrevista con Oren y poder abordar los temas de cómo ha sido el proceso de innovación en Israel y qué lecciones podemos aprender para nuestro país. En lo personal, comenzar presentándome. Nicolás Tognalli, soy el Managing Partner de CITES, un fondo de Venture Capital aquí en Argentina. En los paneles anteriores se ha hablado de la economía del conocimiento. En la provincia de Santa Fe hay varias iniciativas de aceleradoras y fondos de Venture Capital. CITES es uno de ellos. Es la primera que ha visto nuestro país en empezar a invertir en proyectos de base científica. Hemos creado 20 compañías, más de 70 patentes. Y la posibilidad de tener esta entrevista es porque con Oren Gershtein venimos trabajando desde hace más de 10 años. Ya nuestra relación va más allá de la relación profesional y para mí es un placer presentarlo y contarles y poder entrevistarlo y abordar los distintos temas que interesan en este panel. Hi Oren, how are you? It's a pleasure to have you here in this IDEA experience.
Hey Nico, the pleasure is all mine.
Oren Gershtein has been in the center of the innovation ecosystem in Israel in the last 20 years, but also he has shared his knowledge in different parts of this world. For public sectors, like he has done his job in New Zealand, but also for private sector, as it was mentioned here in Argentina, together with Grupos Sancor Seguros. He has been managing a tech incubator in Jerusalem for more than 15 years, and we have been working together since the last decade. So, Oren, it's a pleasure to have you here. We know that Israel and Middle East is in a difficult situation. That's why you are not here present today. Oren, you know, Israel has 1% of the surface of our country, of Argentina, 20% of our population, but the same GDP. That means 5 times the GDP per inhabitant of Argentina. But almost 40 years ago, you have there more than 400% of inflation a year, and you were selling oranges to the world. So how Israel become the lead in the innovation space worldwide today?
Well, Nico, the beginning of the story, as you mentioned, was at the mid-80s when Israel is suffering from hyperinflation. That was the beginning of the first public-private partnership initiatives that was set by the government. These public-private partnerships to support startup companies was initiated in a form of 10 small venture capital that was brought 2 things from the US. They brought money, they brought foreign investor to invest in Israel with a very aggressive incentivized financial mechanism, but not less important, they have brought knowledge, soft skills, capabilities, the expertise of how to take ideas and to fold them into startup companies and how to make those startup companies global from day one.
Oren, sorry, you mentioned a lot of topics over there, the public-private partnership. Today here in the previous panel, there was something that was in the panel as well. And soft skills, bringing money and expertise to Israel, so you avoid to reinvent the wheel, we can say about that. Which are the most important elements that all that policy had at the beginning?
Well, before referring to the elements, it will be worthwhile to state that since mid-80s until today, the Israeli government is consistently involved in supporting these all initiatives. And that brings us to the first conclusion and lesson that we can take out of this discussion, and that is that the establishment of this whole ecosystem is not spontaneous process. This is government responsibility, and the continuation of this activity is not automatic. This is government responsibility. Well, with regarding to the activity that was brought by the government, we can refer to three main things. The first one is to build one agency that was managing this whole activity. It's not separated around several ministries. The second thing is that this public-private partnership is based on the principle that government taking significant part of the risk in this public-private partnership. There is no free meal. If you succeed, you pay back. But if you didn't, there is no lien, no liabilities, no loans. Everything will be paid by the public sector. And maybe the second thing that the government brought is incentives for investors. Incentives in sense of tax incentives for private investor and foreign investors and institutional investors to engage them into this process of creating, investing, and managing startup companies, which are the economical growth engine for this whole knowledge economy.
Let's make a deep inside what you have mentioned recently. What does it mean to make huge investment coming from the private sector? How much decide was the private sector into fulfill this new strategy?
So that's where magic started. Nico, Israel led the OECD with the expenditures, not investment, expenditures on research and development. Twice as much as the average on the OECD. Israel is 5.7%, OECD is less than 3%. Argentina, for a reference, is 0.5. If we are calculating this amount, this is turned to be around $20 billion a year. Now, we can ask, could the private sector pay $20 billion? Not in Israel. The magic is that 90% of this amount is private money, and most amazing, Nico, is that 50% of this amount is not even Israeli money, it's foreign money that paying salaries to Israeli engineers in Israel in foreign currency.
That is too good to be true, Oren. So let us know a little bit which are the mechanisms that Israel implement in order to make this magic to happen.
So the mechanism that Israel created along the years and that was developed is a variety of policies that have been managing by the Israel Innovation Authority that responsible for the support in the entire life cycle of startup company. The meaning is that the government is involved since the creation of an idea until the company is been IPO and supporting the entire life cycle. And the government doing that in a unique way, which it's reducing risk for the private sector. So for example, Nico, we can refer to the technology incubator policy in Israel, which is running since the beginning of the 90s. In this policy, the government is participate in this public-private partnership in a proportion of 7-1.
Could you repeat it?
7-1. $7 to each private sector, $1. 7-1.
Why the state invest such amount of money in a bigger proportion than the private sector at that initial state?
Because that's referring to one of the responsibility of the public sector. One of the responsibility of the private sector is to identify market failures and to support this market failure. And the government of the State of Israel at the beginning of the or mid-80s and continue since then in the last 40 years identified that at the initial stage, private investors are not willing to take the risk. So the government taking the risk, reducing the risk for the private sector, and then enable the private sector to continue to expend money. And by that, enforcing that the private sector will expend more money down the road on those startup companies. And in that way, the government enforce and maintain this economical ecosystem that private sector is expending 90% of the resources while the government is expending around 10.
This kind of initiative, Oren, was built step by step, or it was there a big jump at the beginning of the initiative?
Well, there are things like crossing a chasm in 2 steps. You cannot cross a chasm in 2 steps. You need to make one big steps. The reason for that enforcing the government to take one big step and investing significant amount of resources in a continuous way, not stopping, is because one of the challenges in order to create this high-tech ecosystem and then utilizing knowledge economy is that you need to create a critical mass of activity in a short period of time. So that's why it's required one big step and not small incremental steps. Every public policy that aiming to build and to support the tech initiatives should do it in one big step.
You have been here in Argentina several times in the last decade. You also were familiar with the tech incubator, the scientific tech incubator, and the Funds of Funds initiative a couple of years ago. Could you refer to that initiative? Was that comparable to the ones that Israel has developed? Which is the impact that you saw here in our ecosystem after such an initiative launched as a national level?
Well, I think that the CPMI initiative that you're referring to is one of the best example and proof that Argentina got everything it takes and Argentina knows how to build and to execute. Well, this initiative that I was involved in supporting and in the planning as well, and I was members of one of the panels that choose the candidates at the final stage, was built and in a very creative way in a very short period of time and enable 3 types of activities that are mandatory for this ecosystem to be created. That was the fund of fund, that was the accelerators, and that was the tech incubators. This shows that Argentina got skills, capabilities, vision, and execution. Now, the outcome of this policy was amazing. It was truly, truly amazing. It was creating 3 different vehicles, financial vehicles, professional vehicles that the ecosystem required in order to be developed in a very short period of time. The issue or the lack of continuity of this initiative is something to learn from and to remember that the continuity and the sustainability of maintaining an ecosystem from the public sector perspective is an ongoing and it's mandatory.
That's a good news for us. We have the capabilities to implement some of the politics that you have made in order to boost the innovation ecosystem in Israel. And going back again to Israel, Oren, could you tell us about some of the tax incentives, grants, subsidies, or the different aspect where the public sector still invests in order to keep maturing the innovation ecosystem over there year after year? Which are
Yes.
the tools that you are implementing?
So there is a variety of tools. There is more than 40 different policies, and we can mention several of them. One of them is the Tech Incubator program, which in that the government is investing in a proportion of 7-1 in order to reduce risk at the initial stage and enable private sector to continue with those investments. This is one of the policies. There are other policies that enabling individuals to protect their invention. And in that case, the government is even giving 100%. So if you are individual in Israel and you've got an idea and you want to protect this idea with a patent, so you will be able to commercialize it in later stages, you will even get 100% support from the government. That's on the public side. For the initiative and the tax incentives for the private sector, mainly in order to convince the institutional investors and angel investors, government created a variety of tax law incentives that if you are an angel investor or if you are institutional investors, you can get a safety net of up to 25% and sometimes more to protect your investment. And that in order to enforce the participation of different players. Angel investors doing small investment, institutional investors are doing huge investment, usually in VC fund that then invest in startup companies.
Oren, you know, here in a previous panel, it was said that the human resources, maybe it's a bottleneck for the development of our ecosystem in Argentina. How is your understanding of the differences between the human resources in Israel against the human resources here in Argentina, and also if you can refer as well to the difference in science, technology, and tech transfer capabilities in the two countries?
So, Nico, I would say the follows. I think that from the science perspective and academic perspective, there is no difference. Argentina and Israel and the US and Europe are very similar in the sense that academic are focused, incentivized, and being rewarded for their publication. They don't have skills of entrepreneurs. They don't know how to manage startup companies, and they don't know how to take companies into IPOs. They know how to do research. In between private sector and the academia, there is the technology transfer office. And those organizations are responsible to bridge the gap between the private sector investing and managing those startup companies and the researchers. And along the years, we didn't born with this knowledge. We developed this knowledge over the years. And actually, this is part of the element that I was mentioning at the beginning of our conversation about the soft skills that Israeli brought from the US. One of those was the ability to commercialize and to manage technology transfer office, which is responsible for bridging between the academia and the private sector. That's for the academia. There are a bit of differences between the cultural aspects in Argentina and in Israel, unlike any other countries. But I would say the follows. All of those things that I'm referring to are not rocket science. Argentina doing by far more complicated things. In Israel, for example, innovation is something that is started to be taught in high school and then in university. Entrepreneurship is something that's been taught in university as a professional. And today to be an entrepreneur in Israel is a very respectable status. Would that was the case back in the 80s? No. But I would tell you that developing those capabilities can be done in a very short period of time, and to see the outcome for on the national level or the macroeconomic level is something that can be seen in a short period of time if all the other elements are being put in place in the equation.
I read a report where it says that, as you mentioned, the number of papers published per number of researchers in Israel, in the States, Europe, and in Argentina is more or less the same. But the difference comes on the table when you are measuring the number of patents or startups generated per researcher in those different geographies, where Argentina is far away from the other regions. Before, just a minute ago, I was talking about the human resources and maybe their lack of their bottleneck, and you have just mentioned that the TTO offices, the tech transfer offices, are crucial, and the generation of value through knowledge is crucial. There are a lot of kind of entrepreneurs. There are entrepreneurs in digital space, but also in science and technology. You mentioned that it's very important to develop them. Which is the impact for Israel to develop research-based entrepreneurs, research-based startups? Can you share with the audience which is the impact in the local economy?
Absolutely. The contribution for the microeconomy, the contribution for the export of the state of Israel is being supported or created or responsible. The tech industry is responsible for about 50% of the export of Israel. We are exporting knowledge, Nico. We used to export orange juice. Now we are exporting knowledge. We are taking an idea, and this is exactly the process that you have been referring to. We understand that in order to capture the economical value of knowledge, we need to patent this idea in order to have the legal right. And this is a common practice in Israel, and that enabled the nation to benefit and to generate about 50% of the export from the tech industry. If we are looking on the working force of the nation, this is amazing. 10% of the working force in Israel, which working in the tech industry, are responsible for more than 35% of the tax, of the working tax income for the entire nation. So 10% responsible for more than 35%. And one of the reasons for that is that their salaries are higher than the average salary. And how come? Because they have been supported and paid in foreign currency, or been supported by foreign investors that investing in foreign currency, which is, for the dollars, it's almost 3 to 3.5 to 1. In euro, it's almost 4 to 1.
50% of Israeli export coming from knowledge economy. Here in Argentina, when we mention or when we refer to knowledge economy, most of the time we are thinking on digital companies or IT industry. In the last years, biotechnology come into play, There are some other fields in the deep tech industry. Could you refer to some of them and which are the trends that you believe are going on around the globe?
Yes, for sure. I will first refer to the beginning of your questions about the contribution to the local economy in Argentina. And if we look or take, for example, agri-tech in Argentina, which is a fundamental element within the economical mechanism of the nation. If you would be able, by using knowledge economy, taking an idea and turn them into mechanism that's creating value, if you would be able to create 10 times or 5 times more soy per acre, would that make a change on the national economy? If you would be able to produce 10 times more wheat per acre because you would use inventions or innovation within the agri-tech, would that make a difference? The answer is, of course, yes. And that is one of the outcomes that will have an immediate impact on the Argentinian economy. And maybe to summarize that before jumping into the trends, there is a principle in knowledge economy that stated the follows. If you are using raw material and energy, you have less of them. If you are using knowledge, you have more of it. Take this statement and see what kind of implication that could do to the Argentinian economy. For the trends, I wish I would knew what the next trend is, and if I would be, I would be probably the richest man on on earth. But I don't know. But there is a few things I do know. There are 3 main verticals that we can refer to. One of them is artificial intelligence. The second one is quantum computing, and the third one referring to 5G communications or 5G communications application that will enable the utilizations of many other solutions on agricultural, on industry, for the traditional industry and for the advanced industries. But if there is one thing we know is that government involvement in supporting each one of the first two, artificial intelligence and quantum computing, is fundamental. And it's fundamental because it's required infrastructure that the private sector by itself would not commonly use or will invest in. And if the nation will put the infrastructure and enable the private sector to develop applications, solutions, and innovations based on those two vertical, artificial intelligence and quantum computing, I know that Argentina will see the outcome of that in the very near future. And maybe to remind, last thing, we are not talking about processes in Israel, we are looking on the last 40 years. But if we are trying to see what was the inflection point, where did the nations started to see value, this is in just a few years. If we are taking the New Zealand example, New Zealand government, within the initiative that they have started about 10 years ago, started to see an outcome between 3 to 5 years, which is no time, and that was fundamental change for the ecosystem and for the economy of the nation in the case of New Zealand. And of course, we know the story of the state of Israel.
Oren, the next panel will be focused on innovation in different areas. You have mentioned some of the trends, but along your exposition, you talk about public-private partnership, the importance of going global from day one to make big bet and steps, investing very strong in innovation, in research and in science, human resources. But public-private partnerships requires the private sector. And here in the audience, we have more than 500 businessmen that comes from the private sector. And so, which is your advice to them in order to promote this kind of innovative ecosystem and knowledge economy?
I think that there are a few things that are mandatory. The first one is to be brave enough and to collaborate with the public sector. It's not natural for private sector to collaborate with public sector. So the first thing is to be able to collaborate with the public sector. Second thing, referring to the issue of embracing failure. In Israel, failure considered to be an asset. If a person was failed, he learned something from the process. And embracing failure is something which is very strong in Israeli DNA or Israeli society or professional tech companies, and which we are starting to see in the multinational corporates as well, embracing failure as a national policy. So for the private sector, open your mind to the idea that failure are asset and embrace failure. It's not that you are incentivize someone to fail, but you are enabling the failures in order to learn. And maybe the other two important things, if any of the person in the audience, either ministry or private sector, directors, CEO, manager of unit, manager of a small company, if you do not have a position of innovation manager in your corporates, you are missing something fundamental. The next thing that you need to do tomorrow morning is to publish a new position in your organization to have innovation manager. An innovation manager will be the person that will enable your organizations to learn, to be exposed, and to benefit from what knowledge economy can bring you from a business perspective.
Oren, we have used all the time that we have for this panel. It was really a pleasure to talk with you. I hope that the audience has taken advantage of your knowledge, your advices as well. So from my side, just send my regard to you and hope that everything in the Middle East keep in calm.
Nico, thank you so much. Thank you for the audience. It was a great pleasure, and I promise next time to do it in person in Argentina.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Ciao.